Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and the death of Brandon Embry. Now, Brandon Embry was a 33-year-old man that was found dead in his apartment, which was located in Asheboro, North Carolina. He was found, or at least I say he was found physically beaten. He was pronounced dead the next day on the 13th, but he was found laying next to body laying next to the bathtub. He appeared to have extensive bruises and injuries to his body, and it was ruled that he had died from self-inflicted injury and pneumonia, but the evidence to me really seems that it's really the other way. It does appear to me from this that he was beaten and killed. I really do believe ostensibly that that is what actually transpired. A fine young man that left the world way too early. He had been, I believe, a Navy veteran, and there was the place was basically dismantled, the apartment, and there were blood stains found on at least one wall in the apartment. And mother of Brandon had stated that there was some chemicals found by his mouth. I believe it was antifreeze is what it appeared, at least appeared to be. And also hypothermia conditions is what she had stated as well. And I'm going to talk about some natal placements and transits in his chart that can confer, I believe, that this was actually a murder in contrast to a death through self-inflicted wounds and pneumonia. So anyway, first off, Brandon was born on September 7th, 1986. In Louisville, Kentucky, and he was born with, of course, Sun in Virgo, his Moon in Scorpio, and also with a Taurus ascendant. And eerily enough, his ascendant degree is at 22 degrees, which is the same degree as mine. His house placement is actually set up very similarly too, as well, obviously. And the thing about it is, the first thing, in 22 degrees, as far as Taurus goes, that is a critical degree. 22 degrees for the fixed signs in astrology is a critical degree. The 22nd also for all signs is considered adverse. It's a very it could be really. It could be a negative degree, but the fact that it's even at a critical degree in astrology, again, fixed signs at 22 degrees are critical, could make the energy more pronounced and more prominent. And anyway, the thing about this is, as far as natal placements and transits in his chart that may have been tied in to his past. The first thing I want to say is that the mother of Sarah Lee had stated to me that a Gemini and a Virgo may likely have been involved in this. Two females, I believe, a Gemini and a Virgo person, Virgo Sun, Gemini Sun, I believe this was. And the thing about is what's interesting is that he has Chiron in Gemini, and Chiron astrology is not just about emotional wounds and suffering. It could be about physical ones as well, and it falls in his second house of possessions in his chart. And another thing that's interesting too is that the ruler of his fourth house of the end of life, the Sun, he has Leo on the cusp of the fourth house, but that ruler, the Sun, is in Virgo, and so that's another indicator that may confer that a Virgo may have been involved in his at the end of his life. And also too, his progressed fourth house cusp was in Virgo as well. So this is something too. I mean, looking at this, he also had the Black Moon Lilith in his chart conjunct his Chiron in Gemini, so that could indicate more suffering through the physical attack. And also too, I mean, the fact that it was in Gemini There might have been some prevarication, I call trickeration involved. Some trickery may have been involved in this as well, in assuming he was attacked. And in fact, another thing, and keep in mind the Black Moon Lilith in a very negative manifestation could also be connected with death. So, I mean, he does have Chiron conjunct the Black Moon Lilith. It's a very tight conjunction, and that could indicate and suggest that the death could be one that was one that had a lot of suffering, sadly, in it, and physical and possible physical injury, and which he did. And I mean, he had extensive bruising to the body, and it's very hard for me to grasp and fathom how somebody would, if they were going to kill themselves, it's not going to generally be through extensive bruising and punching yourself or whatever, whether it was stabbing and or punching. The thing about this is, I mean, there's obviously much quicker ways to do that if you were actually going to take your life, and that's another thing that's suspicious to me. But anyway, some other things in his chart, natally and transits that that are tied in with his passing. Also, he had transit Mars not far from his natal sun at the time of his death, and when you have a conjunction, or at least close to a conjunction like this in transit, you're talking about Mars as the planet's connected with attacking, and it's volatile. There's violence, and the Sun, of course, is associated with the physical body. So this, to me, can suggest an attack on the physical body being in Virgo, and may have been one that was meticulously planned, and also could just simply be physical harm to the body, just in general. Another thing too is when I look at his chart, is that transit Neptune was opposing his natal Mercury at the time. So even though he has his Mercury in its dignity in Virgo, which is able to often be very punctilious with details and be very analytical, he, to me, the fact that transit Neptune was opposing it might have been a difficulty in actually seeing deception, because Mercury can also be connected with eyesight. So figuratively speaking, seeing deception, duplicity, might have actually been difficult for him, more so than usual at this time. And he also, at this time, transit Neptune was not far from his natal Jupiter, and in Pisces, in the 11th house of friends and acquaintances. And when you have, as I've spoken about in previous videos, Jupiter can be very paradoxical, could be very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. And in this case, perhaps an enlarged duplicity, deception could also be an indicator too. The fact that Jupiter is associated with the law is that it may have also increased maybe deception, duplicity with the law, if there is indeed a cover-up in connection with his death. And what I noticed too, he also has Pisces intercepted in the 11th house, which could give certain difficulty in seeing, another indicator of having certain difficulty in deciphering and being able to see deception, duplicity in friends and acquaintances, and also having Virgo intercepted in his 5th house in his natal chart that could be an indicator of having difficulty in seeing the details, maybe in people that he enjoyed time with, or maybe somebody in a romantic connection as well. Another thing too, what I noticed as well, is that he has Pluto conjunct his moon in his chart. So that could be something where you're talking about moon is the public, and Pluto is death. Scorpio is the sign of can be connected with murder. So it's not, really shocking that this was a death that was something that went a death that did go to the public, and it was, I mean, it hasn't been ruled a murder. I understand that, but it is, you know, it does appear to be. That's what it likely is. I believe. I think really ostensibly, again, what I believe it is. And another thing too. Hold on a moment, people. Another thing, sorry about the back, but another thing I noticed is that in his chart, what I would call controversial, would call a mutable grand cross. A grand cross in astrology can be a grand cross configuration, I should say. A grand cross in astrology, often I'm sure you've seen, can be labeled as the cross to bear. It can often bring much tribulation and adversity. And the thing about it is he has what I call a controversial grand cross configuration because Chiron is involved in it. A lot of astrologers may not use Chiron given it is an asteroid. Many astrologers prefer to just use planets, but I think Chiron can be a very significant point in one's chart, so I do use it. Now, in this configuration, he has, again, Chiron, you know, in Gemini, and he has the Sun and Mercury conjunct each other. And he also has Uranus involved in it, Uranus in Sagittarius, which appears to make a close conjunction to the 8th house cusp of death, and Jupiter, which can be connected with the law. And you're talking about Chiron again can be associated with physical wounds. The Sun is about life, and you're looking at and being in Virgo, likely a very scrupulous life he lived, with really maybe health-minded, very strong attention to detail. And Uranus is again, that's conjunct the 8th house cusp, which can indicate a very unanticipated, unusual death. And then you're talking about Jupiter being involved in it as well. In Pisces, the sign of deception and duplicity, and Jupiter could be connected with the law. So those are, so to me, this might have had something to do with this natally. And something else I wanted to talk about too is that transit Jupiter at the time was not far from his natal Uranus, so that could actually increase and inflate a propensity for perhaps an unusual manner of death, and the fact that, again, because Uranus, even though it's not in the 8th house, it's conjunct the 8th house cusp from the 7th. Another thing too I want to talk about is the fact that you know, when he died, there appeared to be, from what Sarah Lee had stated to me, that there was some kind of chemical by his mouth, and she stated something about antifreeze. At least it appeared to be. He has Neptune in his 8th house in his natal chart. And Neptune, I mean, it obviously could be connected with a multitude of things. It is, Neptune can be connected with chemicals, which can include poisoning. And that is in his 8th house of death. He also, I found interesting as well, is that the ruler of his 12th house of deception falls in the 9th house of the law. So maybe this is an indicator that he would be involved in something deceitful connected with the law, which maybe there is an actual cover-up in connection with his death. Another thing too, what I'm noticing in his chart now, when he was attacked, when he died at this time, I mean shortly before that, when he what apparently looked like an attack to me, he had transit Saturn not far from his natal Mars. I believe it was a conjunction to his natal Mars, or at least a loose one. Now the thing about that is that could manifest in a number of ways. That could be, you know, about an attack that was very cold, calculated, premeditated. Also, at the time as well, I thought it's interesting, there was that the mother had spoken about antifreeze being, some chemical being by his mouth. And this is not to be flippant or facetious, but the fact that transit, and I'm just trying, hold on, I'm going to pick up this on a see, I'm just trying to see if something was, if it was really actually conjunct or it was a loose conjunction. Well, the transit of Saturn had made, it looks like it's actually a loose conjunction to his natal Mars, but it still could have had some effect. I think when I look at this, going back to the antifreeze, is that Saturn was in Capricorn, and Saturn in Capricorn, of course, could be very cold energy. Mars is about combat, it's adversarial, so you're having Mars contacting Saturn at the time. So it's really kind of like combating for something that's frozen, that's actually very cold. And the thing is, too, that transit Pluto was not far from his natal Mars at the time. It wasn't conjunct as far as orbs that are allowed for transits. It was like maybe about 4 degrees away from his natal Mars. But I don't think we can definitively say that a planet, that's 4 degrees away by transit to another one doesn't give it any vibration at all. Transit Pluto near Mars could manifest in a death that is very volatile and violent. So, and I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that I wanted to get at as well. Well, it's interesting that the death was ruled that he died due to self-inflicted injury and pneumonia. That's a little bit, it's kind of like a little ambiguous to me, because are they actually stating that he died due to suicide, or was this a combination of the self-inflicted wounds and pneumonia? But what's interesting with Neptune in the 8th house could be an indicator of death by suicide, but I don't think that is what happened. It's interesting that Neptune in his natal chart in the 8th house is also retrograde. So it's almost like, I wonder if that could be like maybe a theory that, or somebody stating a suicide that really actually wasn't. Because oddly enough, Neptune is retrograde in his 8th house in his natal chart. And the thing too, really, I mean, looking at this as well, and he was also found by the bathtub with running water. Neptune can be connected with bodies of water. I would say too, Neptune can have some association with water, with just regular water, because it is associated with flooding. And really is not much more. The only something I noticed too in his progressed chart is that he had at the time, the progressed sun was a fairly close conjunction to the progressed south node. And it was when you're talking about the south node near the sun, whether it's through a transit or it's through a progression, that could sometimes suggest the end of one's life, because the sun is about life, and the south node can reflect what we're going away from. It was in the progressed sun and south node were both in Libra, so maybe at the time it was a life that he had that was fairly balanced, one that he was trying to live in peace and have certain tranquility in it, and really have very good relationships with others. And having a Taurus ascendant, of course, he was trying to really, I mean, I'm sure his life really was strongly connected with peace, and I could relate and empathize because I have a Taurus ascendant. Again, it's at the same degree as his in his own natal chart. The only other thing I wanted to get at is that he did have as well, the transit south node was not far from his natal Mars at the time when he passed as well, and that again could be going away from energy. And another thing, this is it, I believe now, the south node in his natal chart was at least a loose conjunction to his natal Venus. And when you have the south node, and the south node in astrology can, I would say, affect the planet that it's contacting to its detriment. And he had in Venus is the planet of relationships. Venus and Scorpio can be about ones that have jealousy, I'm not saying from him, it could be from the other person. It could have jealousy, there could be vengeance involved, and manipulation. And he does have the South Node conjuncted in the natal chart. But anyway, people, and in summation, in conclusion, again, to reiterate what I stated previously near the beginning of the video, that I do believe that he died as a result of a ruthless and savage beating. I think he ostensibly, the death is ostensibly murder. It's something that was not real murder, but I do believe that is what happened. And I really don't understand why they came to that conclusion that it was self-inflicted wounds and pneumonia is what he had died from. I don't really quite understand that, but that is what it's ruled. And Sarah Lee, his mother, I believe, is going to fight this tooth and nail, and to get at least like some kind of wrongful death conviction on it at the very least. And kudos to her that she's not giving up the battle on this, and that she's going to fight this with fierce loyalty, due to fierce loyalty to her son. Anyway, and fight it relentlessly. Anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.